President Tom and fellow Rotarians, it is a great honor for me to introduce to you Sue Rahr. Sue Rahr began her 41-year law enforcement career as a patrol deputy with the King County Sheriff's Office in 1979 and worked her way up through the ranks and was elected sheriff in 2005. She served as sheriff for 7 years, retiring in 2012. She was responsible for over 1,000 employees, 700 patrol deputies, $150 million budget, and contract police services in 12 cities and transit policing for the Seattle Puget Sound region. She led the King County Sheriff's Office to national accreditation in 2010, and she was awarded the 2010 Elected Official of the Year by the Municipal League. In 2012, she was appointed Executive Director of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, served for 9 years, and was responsible for training all city and county law enforcement corrections officers for over 300 agencies across the state. She served as a member of the executive session on policing at the Harvard Kennedy School from 2011 to 2014, the President's Task Force on the 21st Century Policing in 2015, serves in an advisory capacity with numerous police reform organizations, including the Council on Criminal Justice Law Enforcement to reduce criminal and incarceration. She has served many nonprofit and community and professional boards, President, Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, Commissioner, Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, Executive Director, National Sheriffs Association, Board of Directors for the National Police Foundation. She graduated cum laude with a BA in criminal justice from the Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Cougs!
She's a graduate of the National Sheriff's Institute and the FBI National Executive Institute. She co-authored an academic paper about transforming the culture of policing at the Washington Criminal Justice Training Commission, which was published in 2015. She is married to a retired high school teacher and has 2 adult sons and 2 grandchildren. On a personal note, I had the honor to work with Sue Rahr when I served under 2 different county execs. One was Tim Hill and the other was Ron Sims. Her quotes, her titles say police officer, but I've always known her to be a peace officer who always collaborated to find approaches for the common good. And she's here to speak to us about transforming the culture of policing from warriors to guardians. I introduce my very good friend, Sue Rahr.
Thank you so much, George. I feel old after that introduction.
You're young in spirit.
Yeah, I'm a couple months away from Medicare. That represents freedom to me. Before I start my comments, because we're talking about transformation, I want to take a little bit of privilege and introduce 2 people that are going to carry out the work at the Training Commission as I'm retiring very, very soon. It's been sort of a long drawn out retirement process, but it's important because transforming culture is extremely difficult work. And frankly, I did the easy part. And the 2 people that are going to carry out the work, they have the hard part because it's a lot harder to implement a new plan than it is to create it. So I just want to introduce 2 very good friends and 2 people that I have deep respect for. First, I'd like to introduce Jarrell Wills. He is the Deputy Director of the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And Jarrell, just because I want to make you talk for a second, would you give us the 30-second overview of your career? Surprise. You're on mute. You're muted. Oh, maybe he can't. Sorry about that. Okay, well then I'll give the 30-second overview. Jarrell and I worked together in the sheriff's office for over 30 years. And he has been involved in a variety of assignments, including a SWAT team operator, and then overseeing the SWAT team and the criminal investigations division of the sheriff's office. Jarrell has always been an ethical and outspoken leader. And one of the reasons I was so excited to bring him on board as the deputy director is because I knew that he would do the hard work and he wouldn't care about pushback or people complaining about what he might be doing that isn't popular. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to also introduce the interim executive director of the commission, who I hope will soon be the permanent executive director, Monica Alexander. Monica, I spent quite a bit of time trying to recruit Monica, and I was finally successful a couple years ago. She retired after 25 years with the Washington State Patrol. I see your mute button off, Monica. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you so much, Sue. And I will be really little. I spent time with the State Patrol and I absolutely loved my career. I admired Sue for many years and came to her office one day and said, will you please be my mentor? Because the State Patrol didn't have any females that outranked me, and I needed to know how to keep moving forward in my career. And Sue was gracious and kind and said yes, because I had admired her from afar for years. So when I retired from the State Patrol, Sue gave me 5 minutes after I sent out my flyer saying I was going to retire, and she called me and said, come work with me. And that was one of the best invitations I've ever had. And this has been a real big party, sometimes fun, sometimes not, but we're really excited. I'm excited to work with Jarrell. I was so excited to get not even 2 years with Sue, but enough time to understand the vision that she had. And it is amazing. So thank you for letting me sit in and listen to her. I'm always learning from her. So this is very exciting.
Thanks so much, Monica. And I hope down the road that Monica will have an opportunity to talk more about her interesting and storied career and the leadership challenges that she has overcome. So I'm going to do what they tell you not to do. And I actually wrote out the comments that I want to make today, because I'm going to try and cover a lot of territory. And as Monica and Jarrell know, if I don't have a script, I tend to wander off and this will go on for hours. So I want to cover a lot of material quickly so we have a few minutes for questions at the end. So before I dive into the discussion about how we've been working to transform the culture of training at the Police Academy, first, it's important that I lay a little bit of groundwork. So first, it's important to know some basic information about how law enforcement works in the United States. We're unique in the world because law enforcement is controlled and delivered at the local level. We have 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this nation. Over half have less than 10 officers. They're controlled by the same number of county and city governments or elected sheriffs. There are no national standards for hiring, training, oversight, policies, or procedures. It is a fiercely local endeavor, and that's one of the greatest challenges we face in police reform. There are 650 distinctly different police academies that train all of those officers. Some are operated by police departments, some by community colleges, others are a mixture. Most states have an oversight board that sets training standards that the academy must follow. Washington State has the Criminal Justice Training Commission, which not only establishes training standards, but delivers the training. This is very unique. The commission is also responsible for certifying peace officers, which is the equivalent of granting a license to engage in law enforcement. Now, I want to tell you a few notes about basic training in Washington State, how it's delivered. Again, we are unique because we have a single academy for all city and county officers. The State Patrol operates the only other training academy, and they only train their troopers. Less than 10 states in the country have a single state-run academy. Washington is considered a very desirable model. In fact, Time magazine recently ran an extensive article that highlighted Washington State and the benefits of our training model. Our academy is located near SeaTac Airport on a 28-acre campus nestled in a suburban neighborhood. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know it was there. We train about 600 new police recruits each year in cohorts of 30. We typically run 6 to 7 classes simultaneously on our campus. The basic law enforcement training program is 5 months long. It's comprised of classroom studies and applied skills, which include physical skills development, a lot of live mock scenario training, and a lot of live firearm and firearm simulator training. Unlike traditional police academies, we do not try to emulate boot camp, which is designed to create obedient soldiers. Rather, we focus on critical thinking and decision-making. Training across all topic areas is integrated to ensure that new officers can synthesize and apply their learning in any situation they're likely to encounter on the street. Training scenarios are created to develop critical thinking skills rather than memorizing formulas and checklists. The recruits don't just learn how to do their jobs, they must think about why they are doing the job in a particular way. They must grapple with what they can do versus what they should do. With that background, I'd like to talk about the culture of policing and why in our statewide academy, we describe the role of a police officer as a guardian, and we use the motto, training the guardians of democracy. When we talk about patriotism at the academy, it's not described by waving a flag and marching into battle. It's about learning how to keep members of the community safe and uphold their constitutional rights. Being a true patriot in law enforcement is hard. It takes skill, intelligence, emotional maturity, and courage. Traditional boot camp style training focuses on following orders and conquering the enemy, rather than critical thinking and protecting the sanctity of human life while also protecting public safety. Given the reality that the mission of policing is so different from the mission of the military, you might be asking yourself, why have so many police academies for so long modeled their training after military boot camp? It sounds a little cliche, but the answer is complicated. I need you to bear with me for a few minutes as I take you down a slightly uncomfortable path that will barely scratch the surface of the complexity of this issue. It begins with the historical context of policing, race, and the mythology around public safety and crime control that's been perpetuated in our country since the 60s. The myth was reinforced repeatedly throughout my career by supervisors, elected officials, and popular culture. We were taught that the best way to improve public safety was to arrest as many people as possible and keep them in jail as long as possible, despite the fact that all the research told us contrary. Tough on crime was the rally cry of politicians and police chiefs. Arrest statistics have been the primary measure of good policing. The concept of harm reduction has barely been considered until recently. It's just been accepted that people who get arrested just deserved it. It wasn't until I began researching the real roots of our system of justice that I finally began to understand the troubling origins of the mythology that I was taught. I learned the more complete truth about the philosophy and the structure of our current criminal justice system. It was not built to promote justice. We may claim to model American policing on the principles of Sir Robert Peel, and we have adopted some of his principles. But the truth is, our criminal justice system evolved to maintain the social order and ensnare people in a system for life by attaching the label of felon to circumvent the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. I'm referring to the great loophole that perpetuated slavery long after the 13th Amendment was passed. People convicted of a felony could still be enslaved by the state or a private contractor working on behalf of the state and making millions of dollars in the process. This strategy was designed to meet the demand for free labor in the late 19th and 20th century. Their battle cry was, need slaves, create felons. Over the next 100 years, the criminal justice system continued to evolve to maintain race-based social order and create a perpetually refreshed pool of free or cheap labor through the enforcement of Jim Crow laws. Then it all started to crash down. When the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, it nullified those convenient laws. The police are now stuck between a rock and a hard place. They could no longer maintain social order by simply enforcing the law. How were they supposed to continue to meet the public expectation of maintaining social order without explicit laws to enforce? That's when our political leaders stepped up and declared the war on drugs the war on crime, the war on just about whatever the new issue was. This crime control strategy replaced the Jim Crow laws and birthed the demand for the warrior cop. We needed warriors to take on these politically popular domestic wars. Aggressive and targeted enforcement of drug and traffic laws became the tool for addressing the concept of crime and disorder. To be honest, though, the focus was really on the perception of disorder more than the actual crime. You know, the kind of behavior that looks and feels dangerous because the people involved look dangerous. Let me give you a concrete example. When we talk about the war on drugs, we don't think about college kids selling their extra tablets of Ritalin to their friends during finals week. We're far more likely to conjure up a mental picture of a young Black man selling drugs on the street in view of the public. Why? Because that's the image of crime and disorder rooted in all of our minds through a lifetime of political rhetoric, media images, and popular culture. It's not the drugs that cause the public fear and outrage. The war isn't being waged against the drugs. It's being waged against the people who use and sell drugs in a manner that violates the socially programmed order in our world. These deeply held views formed over decades lead us to subconsciously dehumanize entire communities. We tolerate crime control strategies that overuse arrest because it's easy to disregard the real harm of arrest on people who have already been dehumanized. We say they deserve it. They did the crime, they should do the time. Except our society is very discerning about who deserves to do the crime. Most people who expect police to arrest the young Black man selling drugs on the street cringe at the idea of saddling a promising young college student for the rest of his life with a felony record for just selling his own prescription to his friends. Very few people cringe at labeling a young Black man as a felon for selling drugs in the street. The crime is the same, the people are not. This is what systemic racism looks like in our criminal justice system. It isn't perpetuated so much by the racial bias of single police officers. It's nested in the collective expectations of our society and the expectations placed on police about the value of the lives of the two young men I've described. I will concede that description is a gross generalization, but I think it gets the point across. I think it's generally agreed that police should not waste their time busting college students selling Ritalin to their friends in the dormitory. But I think we can also agree that the public expects police action when they witness the disorder represented by a young man selling drugs in the street. And it's not the cop on the front line that sets the priorities of targeted enforcement that results in the persistent racial disparity in arrests. They're doing what they're expected to do and what they're rewarded for by their leaders and the elected officials who direct the work of local police departments. It's not the cop on the front line who makes the decision to prosecute and attach a lifetime label of felon. But the cops on the front line get the blame. They need to understand the reality and ramifications of the system they're feeding when they decide to make an arrest. Which brings us back to the question of why so many academies train cops like soldiers. They were meeting the political demand to fight the wars on drugs and crime. Popular culture and equipment vendors embraced and perpetuated this image and made a lot of money in the process. We began challenging this training strategy in Washington State back in 2012. When the nation saw the images of this warrior-fueled policing in Ferguson in 2014, national leaders began to look at Washington for guidance in shifting the culture of policing. Because we're short on time today, I'll give you just a few examples of how we changed our culture. I can also share a link to that academic paper that I co-authored that gives a lot more detail. But just for the sake of illustrating, here are some examples of the concrete actions we began taking in 2012. We wanted to make visual changes first, and what we did was replace trophy cases of police equipment and accoutrements with murals of the Constitution. We ended the practice of requiring recruits to snap to attention. Instead of breaking eye contact and staring into the distance, they're required to make eye contact and initiate a conversation with anyone they come in contact with. This is probably the best skill any police officer can have. We felt it was necessary to train that vigorously during the 5 months. We've enriched our curriculum with more rigorous training on tactical skills that de-escalate potentially risky situations. And we focus on emotional intelligence and using human psychology to promote cooperation and reduce the need for the use of force. In addition to the procedural and curriculum changes, we've also started telling the new generation of police officers the truth, the complete truth about race in the criminal justice system, how it was intended to work, how it really works, and about the real harm caused when force and arrests are the only tools we use. We talk about the benefit of alternatives, such as crisis intervention training and diversion programs for crime related to addiction and mental illness. Our goal is to teach them how to protect their communities and minimize harm, to uphold the Constitution, and to always balance what they can do with what they should do. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and take questions.
Hold on 1 second.
Hopefully nobody's bleeding from the ears. I know I kind of buzzed through that like a buzzsaw,
Yeah,
but I wanted to cover a lot.
There is one question right now. There may be more later. The question is, does the Academy provide ongoing education and development for our police officers, and how are policing methods and practices expected to evolve?
That's a great question. In addition to the basic law enforcement academy, we also do training for corrections. We do advanced training. We have a rich advanced training program. And many of you recall when Initiative I-940 was passed, there was a very lengthy list of training that's required for officers to take, even if they've already been through the academy. So we have an extensive program for advanced training. We do leadership training, skills training, and there are requirements for officers to get 24 hours per year of additional annual training. And I-940 required that we cover some very specific topic areas. Monica, am I missing anything in that list? I know you know it inside out. Okay, I think we got it.
Okay, yes, you are not missing anything. It sounds, I mean, you said it so concise that it sounds small, but it's really quite large.
Yeah.
Great.
But I will say Washington State is the envy of a lot of other state police academies, because our legislature has been supportive of this advanced in-service training. They put money on the table to make this happen. And I think that's really noteworthy. It's always fun to criticize politicians, but the Washington State Legislature has really stepped up to the plate. We got a considerable bucket of funding to do peer intervention training, which is the type of training that teaches officers not only that they should intervene if a fellow officer is about to do something harmful, but how to intervene. It's one thing to say, hey, you should have stepped in and made him stop. But everything we know about human psychology, we are wired not to intervene. So this training is critical to teach those skills.
Okay, one more question here, and there may be some additional ones after that, after we close the meeting. If you can hang around for a few,
Sure.
That'd be great. The question is, do you think models like CAHOOTS model will work? Not familiar.
Can you describe what the acronym stands for, please?
CAHOOTS.
And I don't recall what the acronym stands for, sorry.
Oh, okay. And I don't know the question either. So.
Monica, does it sound familiar to you?
No, but I it up.
I've heard of it, I just can't remember.
The clarification, crisis response model.
Oh, okay, that's where it's familiar.
Yeah.
I do, that's probably why it sounds familiar to me. In my position at the Academy, I was generally aware of the program content, but I didn't really get into the specifics. But we do have a very extensive crisis intervention training program, so I'm sure that's covered.
Great, thank you. I think there are a few more questions. So again, if you could hang around just after the meeting here, that would be great.
We
So I wanna
might be
thank
joined
you.
by my 6-year-old grandson. I'll just warn you. Had a
That's
little
okay.
schedule mix up today.
It's So I want to thank you for a very informative presentation today. I wanted to let you know that in honor of your presentation, we're making a donation in your name to Harvest Against Hunger, which will provide 1,500 pounds of fresh produce to local food banks. So
That's
thank you
wonderful.
much. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for having
Next
me.
week's program, as I mentioned earlier, is a president's transition, what we used to call the promo demo. I guess it is the promo because we're going to promote Steve, and demo meaning we're going to demote me to past president. This is a Zoom meeting. It'll be my last, getting near the end of the Zoom meetings as we transition into in-person meetings very soon. So thank you all for joining us today, and thanks to Jeffrey for his work in helping keep the meetings run on time and on schedule with all the technology, and for the facility that we've been able to do this here today. So with that, we'll call this meeting adjourned, and if you have questions for Sue, please hang on the line. Thank you.